Talking health now, a recent article came out saying that artificial sweeteners used to replace sugar in a huge number of products do not help in losing weight and can actually have serious health effects. That's according to World Health Organization. Now, sweeteners are consumed by millions of people every day in products like diet soda, to sweeten coffee or tea. And this is partly to avoid weight gain from sugar, and that's how it's been sold to us, really, for years and years. But how healthy are those substitutes? Let's ask now. Dr. Ghaida Kaddaha from Medcare Women and Children's Hospital joining us live now. How are you, Doctor?
Hi, Helen. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you for asking. Although I'm not going to lie, I'm quite nervous about this conversation because I don't drink tea or coffee. I'm basically like a giant child, but I do like a diet soda before the show, just to give me a little pep up. So I'm a little bit worried about what we're going to be unfolding, and we've had a few messages looking for some clarification as well. So are you able to tell us, to interpret this statement for us from the World Health Organization? What do we as consumers in every way need to know?
Well, Helen, first of all, good afternoon to you and to all the listeners on your program. Well, ever since the harmful effects of regular sugar became apparent, the food industry, as you mentioned, used all these artificial sweeteners in various foods, with the result that thousands of food products are now sweetened with these artificial sweeteners. And millions of people around the world, as you mentioned, are using them. And that's what really necessitated that the medical community conducts various clinical trials and studies on the safety of these products. And this is exactly what the WHO did. Effectively, what they did, what we call systematic meta-analysis, that's they look at all the available evidence from all the clinical trials that were done so far on the safety of artificial sweeteners. And what they found was that really it's not only that they don't deliver what they promise to deliver, effectively they cause the very conditions they were meant to prevent. So people using them are probably at a higher risk of having weight gain, at a higher risk of developing diabetes. But perhaps the most concerning, bit of information from all these clinical trials was the association of artificial sweeteners with heart disease, especially heart attacks and strokes and even death. Now, suffice it to say, what I would like to say that most of these studies are really what we call observational studies, and in the hierarchy of evidence, they are not the strongest, but they do give you a red flag. They tell you that there's an association. They don't establish a cause and effect relationship. They don't tell us, for sure artificial sweeteners cause heart attacks and cause stroke, but they are telling us about a strong association. Similar to what happened when, about the association, for example, of the bad LDL cholesterol and heart attacks. This is how the story started. There's an association. We could see in observational studies there is a relationship happening in people who have high cholesterol, leading to heart attacks. And later on, this association became such a strong piece of, really a causal relationship, so to say, that now we know that cholesterol causes heart attack, basically. And,
goodness. Yeah. It just sounds so doom and gloom, doesn't it? Because I think, for a lot of people, we kind of felt like this was making a healthy choice. And I wondered if you could kind of speak to maybe some of the side effects that have been identified from sweeteners. What might somebody feel? And I'm not necessarily talking about long-term health effects, but certainly something that you might feel or experience in your body.
So some people who use these artificial sweeteners, there are some studies that show that they do interfere with our the normal gut flora, the normal good bacteria that's in the gut. So some people actually experience a bit of nausea, bloating, cramping, diarrhea. They can cause some, what we call gastrointestinal effects. There are some studies, but these are really very preliminary studies, to show that there is probably a relationship with mood, an association with depression, anxiety, headaches, migraines, stuff like that. But it's fair to say that most of these studies are really very, very preliminary, and but it's another piece of information adding to all the negative effects that these.
And I guess,
yes.
all you can do is exactly that. Put it as part of a bigger picture of, I'm not going to have this, I'm going to have this, and this is what I know about that choice. I mean, for me, I'm aware this is part of perhaps a bigger health problem or question, but I really crave something sweet after most meals, and I know part of that's habit. And for me, sometimes that is a Diet Coke. No product endorsement. I sadly wish I was sponsored by Diet Coke. So I know a lot of it is habit, and my body's like, okay, you've had your lunch, it's 1 o'clock, now it's time to have those bubbles, that drink, the crunch of the ice. So I'm wondering then if there's any kind of natural sugars that you would recommend as a bit of a replacement instead of sweeteners.
I mean, I'll tell you what I tell my patients. It's, natural sugars are not really the best for our health. We know that's an established fact. In fact, the American Heart Association at some stage recommended using, artificial sweeteners in beverages as a replacement for sugary drinks, let's say. But now with the results of all what's coming up, I'm sure they'll back off on this statement. So what I tell my patients, honestly, having like a dessert once in a while, it's not a big deal. But my patients are really patients with diabetes. They are, they have issues with their blood sugar, so they have to avoid natural sugar. But I think the best source of sugar and for sweet is really fresh fruits.
Dates, even.
Easier said than done.
Yes, I've got to be honest, I'm not like, can't wait to have a nectarine instead of, a Twix or something. But I guess, again, maybe it does come back to habit. Maybe it comes back to training your brain and even your taste buds. Dr. Ghaida, I want to go to the text line.
And starting really early in childhood.
Oh, gosh, well, that ship has sailed in our household, but maybe we can turn it around. I want to go to the text line. A message here, no name, says, my daughter's 14 and in my opinion drinks way too much soda. She has at least half a litre every day, sometimes a litre. She doesn't drink much water unless it's the weekend. She does have a healthy diet, though. Can you please give me some information that I can pass on to her? Or is she ultimately okay if she's got a healthy diet? Interesting. Okay. So I guess a couple of issues there. One is how much is too much when it comes to diet soda? And, can you offset it a little bit? If the diet overall is pretty healthy, does it really matter? What would you say to this parent?
Honestly, soda in any form, all these artificially sweetened sodas, apparently they're not very healthy. So the more we have of them, the worse. One of the studies that was done in Cleveland recently, and probably this would have steered the whole issue of the safety of artificial sweeteners. They looked specifically at the level of one of these artificial sweeteners in the blood of patients and correlated them to the bad outcomes we just discussed. So the more, the worse the situation, of course. So the idea is practically is to minimize the intake of artificially sweetened sodas, whatever is the amount. There is no studies that tells us that this amount is safe and this one is dangerous. But there are studies that looked at people who consume 2 cans a day versus those who consume, let's say, 1 can a week. And definitely those consuming 2 cans a day, they had a worse outcome compared to the ones using 1 can a week.
That would be me. Okay. Great question from Naj that's come in on 4001 saying, are there side effects for all kinds of sweeteners? There are many types. There are many types. So when we're looking at different types of artificial sweeteners, are there any that, I'm not saying are healthier than others, but perhaps any that you particularly worry about as a doctor?
The one we particularly worry about is a sweetener called erythritol, which unfortunately probably is part of all the other sweeteners. It's added to the other sweeteners. For example, I remember the nutritionist in our center used to say, stevia is fine. Recommend the stevia to your patients. But most of the stevia that's in the market, it has this other added artificial sweetener by the name of erythritol. And apparently the food industry are not mandated to mention the presence of erythritol on their food label, because erythritol is a substance that occurs naturally in the human body, but it occurs in very, very small amounts in the human body and doesn't cause harm. But when present in large amounts, as was shown in the study from Cleveland, then it's really associated with a bad outcome, heart attacks, stroke, death. So erythritol apparently is bad. There were some concerns in the past about saccharin and bladder cancer, but that happens only in animals, really. There's no strong association between aspartame and saccharin and cancers in general, let's say.
Okay. And Jeeves is asking about, what about honey? Is that safer than cane sugar?
It's safer than artificial sweeteners, but again, honey comes in the category of natural sugars, basically. So it will be as bad as the natural sugars, and we know that the impact, natural sugar. So when you take honey, again, take it in small amounts and in moderation.
And also the quality of the honey. We know there's a lot of honeys here that are really, really poor quality and probably haven't seen much of a bee's bottom. There's there is some kind of key differences there. Nell's asking about caffeine, so hopefully we can squeeze that in, saying how much caffeine is there in a diet drink versus coffee? I was just saying I get my little pre-show buzz from a can of Diet Coke. Am I actually getting any caffeine in that?
The Cokes, definitely. Cokes, and they have caffeine, definitely. Now, I don't know exactly what is the amount of caffeine in a can of Coke, for example, but they contain caffeine. But caffeine has not been really in any way incriminated as being a bad thing, apart from the fact that it gives you a little bit of palpitation if you exceed the amount you're supposed to drink, but it's not been associated with, let's say, bad heart outcomes or strokes or stuff like that. It's the sugar.
It's the sugar.
It's the sugar and the artificial sweeteners in these drinks.
And a message here about stevia. What's your take on that? Green, not processed, because there are a few different types. Can I ask you, what do you think about stevia? And ultimately, if you fancy something sweet in your tea or coffee, as a doctor, what are you putting in that cup?
As I told you till recently, honestly, I mean, I think that what I put in my cup, I don't put any sweeteners or sugar, honestly. And I trained myself. I'll tell you what. I am a person who used to take several spoons of sugar in a cup of tea or coffee. I could not tolerate, I mean, honestly, you have to train yourself. It takes you maybe 2 weeks of suffering, but then, honestly, you cannot...
I don't think I could.
You cannot.
I don't think I could. And what about?
I don't. But the stevia is supposed to be, let's say, something that nutritionists at least recommended as a if you find it in the pure form without the added erythritol and the added, because erythritol is added to stevia to give it bulk, to give it texture, and to also improve the flavor. So if you find it, apparently, according to the nutritionist, it's safer. Okay. So nutritionists say that stevia and another sweetener, neutame, also supposed, I haven't seen neutame, honestly, they're supposed to be relatively safer.
Oh, my goodness. I was kind of hoping you were going to go on to be like, the World Health Organization is overreacting. Helen, you don't need to worry. And now I'm like... Okay, I might need to be treating it to a can a week rather than a can or two a day. And what about fizzy drinks in kids? Now, this is something my mum was really hot on, and I wasn't allowed any fizzy drinks until I was 18, and of course that kind of made them, forbidden fruit. So when I went to my friend Annabelle's house, I'd be like, "Oh, I'll have a cup of Coke," and I didn't even like the taste. It was just exciting because I wasn't allowed it. Now, I'm certainly not saying do this, don't do that, but in terms of health, is there some researched data around avoiding fizzy drinks in kids until maybe the Barbara Spearman approach of 18 years old?
I don't know how to answer this question, so I don't have really the evidence to support such a statement. But, I mean, honestly, it's amazing how schools are doing nowadays, because when you send your kid to a school, the school, they mandate what you put in their lunchbox. And
I know.
Fizzy drinks are not one of them, which is an amazing thing happening, is training kids on how to eat healthy, because you cannot imagine the burden of obesity and type 2 diabetes in our society around the world, but especially in the UAE and in the Gulf region. we have a huge number of diabetes and obesity. And this is all coming from...
I think it's interesting because a lot of schools here have packed lunches, which, do allow a little bit of, autonomy, obviously. But there's also a bit of a downside to that in that, when I was at school, we all ate the same thing at the same time. We all ate with knives and forks. And, there was this kind of collective eating experience that made me eat things that I perhaps, wouldn't have chosen. And I feel like I'd quite like to see that come back. And I'm with you in trying to keep my kids away from fizzy drinks as long as possible. I mean, to be honest with you, they don't like bubbles. So, there's no smug parenting here. They just don't like bubbles. But thank you.
And amazing, if you train them at that young age, honestly, taste is a question of habit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm taking that on board myself. Dr. Ghaida, thank you so much for your time, I think. And I tell you what, there's going to be some absolutely plummeting sales of Diet Coke in the Jumeirah era. So thank you. Really appreciate it. Dr. Ghaida speaking to us from Medcare Women and Children's Hospital, consultant endocrinologist and diabetologist as well.
This content is for informational purposes only and does not intend to substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis or treatment.
This is Pets and Vets on Afternoons with Helen Farmer.
With ProPlan.
Fantastic to have you with